and welcome back to Learning Music with Pat. We all understand that music is a language because we can express all kinds of emotions, all kinds of nuances, from joy to pathos. It all can be expressed in music. So most languages have a written part and a listening part. I have a friend of mine who's a missionary who's gone all over the world, and in some primitive cultures they have their language, their spoken language, because they have to. That's how they communicate with each other, but there's no written language. So what they do in those instances is they go and live with the people of that culture, and sometimes spends years just learning the language, learning the nuances of the language, and when they have that down pat, they create an alphabet. And when they create the alphabet, they have alphabet symbols for the various sounds of the language. And then there's a written language, and they can teach the people to speak their own language. So they have both a written language and a spoken language, a language that they listen to. So in music, you can hear the music, you hear the emotions, you hear what's going on, but you can also read it. We use manuscripts such as this, written music, to be able to play what we want to hear. So what we play is actually what we want to hear in our minds. So there are various signs and symbols that we learn, and of course I've already gone over the notes, the whole notes, the half notes, the quarter notes, eighth notes, rests, and so forth, things like that, so that you will understand how we read music. But there's a lot more symbols in music than that. There's lots of things. How do you cut off a piece? How do you gradually get louder? How do you gradually get slower? How do you change your time? There's just so many things that you can learn, and so many more symbols than what I've gone over so far. So what I thought I would do today is go over some of those symbols, the majority of the ones that you will see, so that when you look at a piece of music, you can say, oh, I know what that's supposed to sound like. Pick up an instrument and play it or sing it. So we're going to go over those symbols today. And the first thing I'm going to talk about is the introduction to a piece. A lot of music has introductions. So let me take my pointer here. The piece starts right here, right beyond these repeat signs. But there's an introduction of one note. You can have introductions of several notes. You can have an introduction of a phrase. Sometimes if you're playing a hymn or something, you can use the last phrase of the hymn or the last 2 or 3 measures of the hymn for the introduction. For example, like Amazing Grace. If I were to play that, I might play this first. That's the introduction. Then I go on and I play it. What I did there was I used the last 4 or 5 measures as the introduction. This particular piece has one note, and only one note is the introduction. So I'm going to play that. So as I do these symbols and describe them, I've written like little pieces of music, little ditties, just so that you can see what I'm talking about. It's easier to understand, I think, if you hear it. So let me play this. One note introduction. Now, what if I wanted more than one note? Or even more than that. You can make an introduction as long or short as you want. You don't even have to have an introduction. The actual piece really starts right here. But most music does have an introduction. It's like announcing the piece, and it actually makes the piece a lot nicer to listen to. So that's what the introduction is. Now let's go to the next page. and we're going to talk about grace notes. A grace note is just a little tiny note, and it appears right before the main note. You can have one grace note, you can have several grace notes. You just zip through them fast. If a grace note has a line through it, that means it's an extremely fast grace note. And I have written this piece so that you can see various grace notes. I don't have to put them in, but it makes the piece a little bit better if I do. So let me play that. Now, if I wanted to play the regular piece without the grace notes, I would start right here. A lot of music has grace notes in it because it just adds a little something, so you get something more fancy than just the plain music. So what you're going to see are very tiny notes, written smaller than the regular notes, coming right before the notes, and you just play it and kind of slip into it and end on the note that you want to play. And it just adds for something. The next I'm going to do are trills. A trill, and you can see the sign for it, it's usually just a TR over the music. And what you do is you just play very fast from the note to the next note above it. If it's a sharp note, you just trill to that sharp. If it's a flat note, you trill to the flat, or if it's the natural note, just trill to the note. It's always the note above it, and you play it as fast as you can. And it's usually marked with just a TR. That's a trill. It's added to the music because it punches it a little. It gives it a little something extra, and it's not uncommon to see. Now, it's harder to do a trill on the recorders than it is to do it on the woodwind. So I brought my soprano sax with me. The soprano sax, or any saxophone or woodwind, has what we call side keys. These are these keys here. And it's much easier to do a trill if you can lift up your finger and do it with a side key, like that. So let me just demonstrate that. Now down on this G, I have to use the finger and move it up and down. But when I get to the A, I can trill it with a side key. Handy just to use side keys for that. Now you use side keys for a lot of other things too. It's easy. If you're going to trill, like say from a B to a C, here's the B on a saxophone. Here's the C, one of the fingerings of the C. And if you can't do this business and get a good trill, your fingers can't move fast enough. But if you take your B and you just take a side key and hit it like that, you can trill a lot faster. So these side keys are very good for trilling. They're good for a lot of other things too, just playing regular notes on them. You're not going to be able to trill by using these side keys on the left. You're not going to be able to move your finger fast enough because these keys operate these keys down here. So, and so they're harder to open. So, but the side keys are very good for trilling. So I just brought that in to show you. That's what a trill is. Very common to see in music. Let's go to the next page. Staccato notes. Staccato notes have a dot on top of them, just a little tiny dot. If they're lower ones, lower notes, the dot's going to appear underneath them. If they're higher notes, the dot will appear on top. And all you do with a staccato is that you make a note very short. Let me get the page here. Let me play this for you. It does not change the tempo of the music. If the music's going to be slow, it's still going to be slow. You're just going to shorten the individual notes without speeding up. Playing it fast, you shorten it. Playing it slow, you still shorten it. That's what a staccato is. Very, very short note. The next one is a fermata. A fermata is a hold, and it appears to be like a little curve on the top, headed up, with a dot right in the center of it. That just means hold. That's all it means. There was a company, they produced a jersey, and it was just supposed to be kind of a funny saying on it, and the saying was, hold me, I'm a fermata. And that's all it means, is to hold. So I'm going to play this piece on the bottom. Now that last note is a half note. I've chosen to hold it for 3 or 4 beats longer. You can hold a note with a hold on it as long as you want. You could hold it for 15 beats if you wanted to, although that probably would never happen. But you're just free to hold it as long as you want. You don't go by the note, which normally has 2 beats. But you just hold it as long as you want. Now, a lot of pieces, when you play them, when you come to the end of the piece, you just gradually slow it down, and the last note is held. And that tells people that the piece is now over with. So it's not uncommon to hear a piece and gradually have it slow down at the end with the last note held, with a hold like that. Although you can hold any note, it doesn't matter what it is. It can be in the middle of a piece or whatever. It doesn't matter. It's just a hold. These notes down here, another way of holding would be to put hold marks, which are little curves, on top of each note. This, I have 5 notes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I would tongue that note, and I would hold all the way through, so it would be like I had 5 beats in one note. I don't tongue the notes individually. They're all held. They're all kind of stuck together as if they were one note. But why do that when all I have to do is write one note and put the hold signal on it? The only reason I would do that is if I specifically want it held for 5 beats. But if I'm going to do that, I could also write a whole note, which usually has 4 beats, and 1 quarter note, which usually has 1 beat, and put them all together. That also would be 5 notes. Sometime I'm going to, fairly soon, come in and show you how you can write the same piece in different ways and come out with the same notes with the same lengths and in different ways. But this I just wanted to put down for you to see. That's the hold. Let's go to the next page. Setting the time. Some people use metronomes when they play. I don't. But a metronome is a device. I don't have one because I don't use it. But a metronome is a device where it will tick the number of beats per minute. So you know if a measure or a song is supposed to be played like 70 beats a minute, it's marked up here. You can set the metronome for 70 and it will tick away, tick, 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 and you know exactly how fast that is supposed to go. So what I wanted to show you here is sometimes you will find at the top of a piece that the timing has been delineated out. The timing has been marked. This says that a quarter note or quarter notes are worth 70 beats a minute. So if you have 4 quarter notes, as I do in this first measure, then you're going to play them as if they were all going 70 beats a minute. And that gives you a sense of how fast that it's going to go. They are handy, metronomes are handy if you want to teach somebody to get a sense of how fast or how slow a song will go. However, you don't want to become a slave to them. You want to have a freedom to interpret. Maybe go a little faster sometimes. Maybe go a little slower sometimes. As long as you're being true to the composer, you can interpret the music. And, you know, music is not like march, like a military thing. You don't have to be so precise in the timing that you don't have a chance to interpret. Let's look at the timing here. A whole note is usually 4 beats. This is called the note head. The note head is just the circle of the note. It can be white or it can be black. If it's black, it's going to probably have a stem on it like this. That would be a black note head. This is a white note head, 4 beats to a whole note. A half note, 2 beats each. The 2 halves are equal to the whole. Quarter notes have 1 beat. It takes 4 of them to make 1 whole beat. 4 of them to make a whole note. Because this is 4 beats, it takes 4 quarters to make the whole. This is a quarter note in itself. The quarter note has 1 beat. The 8th note has a half a beat. And but what I wanted to bring to your attention is you can change this. If you put a dot beside a note, it's worth half the value of the note. So a whole note is worth 4 beats, let's say. That's not universally true, but it's usually true. 4 beats for a whole. The dot gives it half the value. Half the value of a 4-beat note is obviously 2 beats. 2 beats is half of 4. So now, because of that dot, you add the 2 beats, and this whole note becomes 6 beats instead of 4. A dotted half note is usually 3 beats because usually a half note is 2 beats and the dot adds 1/2 the value, which is 1 beat, and you end up by getting a 3-beat note. This is a very, very common note that you see. You rarely see a dotted whole. You often see a dotted half. So this is 3 beats. A quarter note that's dotted is going to be 1.5 beats, and usually what happens is that dotted quarter is followed by an 8th note, and that 8th note just adds enough so you have a total of 2 beats. You can have something called a dotted 8th and 16th. Here's the dotted 8th, and here's the 16th. You put them together, this is, and they make the beat, because this is, a 8th note is half, and you add another half to it, another 16th. A half of an 8th is a 16th, so you add that 8th, and then you add the 16th to it. It's normally written this way, and it has a rhythm to it. For example, I'll play dotted 8ths and 16ths usually sound something like this. Kind of a gallopy kind of thing. And you see that often in music. And so it's not uncommon at all to see a dotted 8th and a 16th added to it, and it makes that 1 beat. The fact that this has a little flag on it makes that, would make that an 8th. And you add that dot to the 8th to add the 16th to it, then you add the other 16th. That's a very common way of marking music. So let's go on to the next page. Holes. A hole, and I've kind of shown you this before. You add the note together as if it's 1 note. This is played like it's 4 beats. this is 3 beats because it's a half note and you add the dot, that makes it an extra beat. And then you bring another note in and you don't tongue that, you just add it to it like it's connected to it. In other words, I could have tongued all of those notes. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, it's waltz. If I had tongued it, it would have been like this. Now, I did tongue part of it, but when you slur it, it just changes it so that it becomes almost like another number. And I've showed you before that you can hold things just by using this hold method, just by doing the curves on it. Now, when you are slurring something, you tongue the first note, but you're obviously not going to tongue the note that you slur to. You're not going to do that because there would be no reason to have it. It would end up by tonguing a note. Then you don't want to tongue it, you want to attach it to the note that's preceding it. Now, repeat signs. I don't think we're going to finish all of this today. We may have to finish it next time. The repeat signs are right here. If you get and you play something and you get to the end of it and you see a sign like this, 2 lines with 2 dots ahead of it, you go back and you repeat the whole thing over again. You only repeat it once, only once. But that tells you that you go back and you do repeat it once, and that means you don't have to write, or the composer does not have to write that down another time. It saves space, it saves effort. A lot of music have repeat signs. If you want to repeat one measure, this is the symbol. You play the piece, and then this, it's a slash, slanted slash, with 1 dot in front and 1 dot behind it. That plays the measure previous to it, but it only plays it once. So if you want to play that measure, say 3 times, you've got to write this 3 times. However many times you write it is the number of times that you repeat that. And I've seen music and played music where you repeat it like 15 times. You just have a whole row of those symbols all the way across the staff line. But think of how they don't have to write all of this out. But you have to keep track of how many times that you're playing it. There is an easier way, of course. Here's my sign right here to repeat that measure. It only refers to that measure before. It doesn't refer to anything before that, but I want it repeated 4 times, so I mark the 4. So this measure, which is that measure, is repeated 4 times. Okay, let's look at the next page. Well, I only have 2 minutes left, so maybe what I should do is, well, I'll just do this one and then we'll close. These are phrase marks. If I can get the page. A phrase is usually 4 measures, 1, 2, 3, 4. And the 4 measures are all interconnected. They're like a group of notes that belong to them together. They're like a group of notes that have a theme. So it's not a slur. It has that same kind of curve, but this is a whole phrase, a whole theme, and then it repeats again with another phrase, and you see this occasionally in music. I'm going to stop at this point because I am running out of time. So we haven't finished. We'll finish the rest of it next time. So I hope you enjoyed it. Hope you're learning from it. Please join me again.